minutes or 2 hours or something. Videos have another advantage. When someone doesn't understand the material, they can go back and replay it. So in answer to your question, it is short videos, 10 to 15 minutes. Now initially some of our videos are longer, but actually to break down a video into 10 to 15 minutes is a challenge. It's an intellectual challenge. So what we've done is we take the material like this and we break it down into 10 to 15 minute videos. It's very difficult to do it. It's like writing, you know how when there's a book and you make a movie out of it, the book is often better, but sometimes the movie is pretty good, and that's because of the screenplay. Right? So similarly, you have to take your lecture and do a screenplay and break it down. How do you break it down? Where do you cut? It's very interesting. Once you do that, we shoot little video lectures. Then we do 3 additional things. What does a professor do? We give lectures, we answer questions. If you have doubts, we clarify doubts, and then we give assignments. Students submit their assignments, and we grade them. But our system is broken today. When I teach at MIT, let's say I'm teaching on a Monday, and I have Monday, Wednesday, Friday class. Let's say I say something on Monday, and the student doesn't understand it, and there are 80 people in the class, and the student is too shy to ask a question. That doubt is stuck in their head, and they're slowly forgetting that they had a doubt, which is even more deadly. I hand out the assignment on Friday. They return the assignment 2 Fridays later. I grade it and give it back to them 3 Fridays later. So if they have a doubt, the resolution comes way after, that is 3 weeks later, they've forgotten the doubt. Meanwhile, that doubt has weakened their foundation, and I'm still barraging them with more information, right? So one of the things we did, one of the first things, and this is a key aspect of this, is we invented automatic grading. Now, if you just do multiple choice, that's easy. We could do that 30 years ago, but we're not talking about multiple choice. We're talking about letting a student design a circuit and telling the student whether the circuit is right. Simulating the circuit. We're talking about having the student write software, some code, and checking to see if the code is right. We're talking about this, asking the student to write an equation and seeing if the equation is right. A chemical equation to see if the stoichiometry is right. Right? We're talking about advanced grading of the sort of stuff usually a human can do and a computer cannot. That is the breakthrough. So that's breakthrough number 1. Breakthrough number 2 is very advanced simulations. So for example, in a real classroom, you can still go to the lab and get a simulation of something, a chemical experiment, physics. If you want to teach magnets, you can take a sheet of paper and put iron filings and move the magnet underneath and see how the iron filings show the shape of the magnetic field. You can do things like that. How do you do that online? So we spent a lot of time thinking about it, and we generated some really incredible simulations. But number 3 is very interesting. Number 3 is social networks. One of the failings of the system is, what do you do when the student has a doubt? Here, the student can ask the professor in a real lecture, Professor, if you can overcome your shyness, you can say, Professor, I have a doubt. Or maybe you catch me later on in a discussion or a recitation. So how do you do it in this format? So initially, when students had doubts, we had a forum, and students could ask the professor, send put a question on the forum, and the professor Anant Agarwal or his TA would answer the question. Now, after doing this for a few days, Anant got tired and fell asleep one day, and he woke up and he discovered something magical had happened. Can you guess what it was? Yeah. Other people started answering the students' questions. And what happened was that the answer from the other students is more sympathetic and more appropriate because this other students understand. And often, the other student's answer is wrong. But yet another student jumps in and corrects it. But there's a progression of thought which actually clarifies more than just the right answer. So Anant and his team invented a new thing. They backed off, let the discussion happen, and they would simply bless the right answer. Fascinating. So the sort of thing that we tell our kids not to do, social networking, turns out to be the savior here. So by combining social networks, automatic grading, and simulations, edX is able to provide a pretty complete education to students who have limited access, like those kids in Mongolia. But for us at MIT, this becomes the entrance criterion for every classroom. So it's like an entrance exam for every classroom. So before you come into class, you do this. And I can see which of you didn't do it. But when you come into class, I can elevate the discussion. And I can do a whole lot of other things that I was dying to do. And that's our goal. For the have-nots, it's very good. For people who come to a residential university, we think you can fundamentally elevate the level of education. And I lead a task force now at MIT to take full advantage of this. So this is the discussion forum. So the idea in the discussion forum, and you can go, by the way, I recommend, yes, sir. Sure. Sure. We like engaged classrooms. Good question. Yep. First of all, they don't fall asleep because we make sure they answer the questions. But that's a good question. We're very concerned about that. So what we've done, in an MIT class, you expect the student to spend 12 hours a week on any given class, 12 hours. And we do surveys to see, did they spend 12 hours? So out of that, usually 3 hours is lecture. So what we do is, if they're watching 3 hours of lecture, the homework will go down to compensate. So we're very careful about the budgeting. The total effort is 12 hours. Now, number one. Number two, when will they watch the video? I don't want my students watching the video at 2 a.m. drinking coffee. So one of the things we're doing at MIT is pretty fundamentally rethinking the learning environment. So a lot of our lectures look like, lecture halls look like amphitheaters. But in this world, we don't need those amphitheaters. So we are actually in the midst of replanning our entire campus to have more discussion rooms, quiet rooms, the library, where students can put on headphones and do this in the day. And also create environments where possibly TAs, teaching assistants, are available, so that as they're doing the learning with this in the day, they get some assistance if they want. So it's a whole cultural change. I will say that there's a lot of pedagogical evidence that shows that this works. But it's a culture change.
So maybe this is a good time to ask a question, since you're talking about discussions.
Yeah.
And this goes back to the discussions that we've had here amongst the faculty at IIM-A.
Yeah.
Which is that in an environment like ours, right, where discussion is the class, that is to say, if you have the case method, and the discussion is the class, I mean, there is no lecture except in very rare situations. Have you thought about how this model may be adopted there?
So in fact, I have a later slide. Actually, no, I don't have it here. That says management and humanities, law, especially cases where there are case methods, have already flipped the classroom. This is called the flipped classroom, right? But, so when I started this, my humanities colleagues came to me and said, look, we've already done this. How do we use this? Well, it's very interesting. Initially, they were a little bit skeptical. But we then found that they found different ways to use the same technology. For example, a history professor who teaches migration discovered that she could use this it's called digital humanities, to show migration patterns on maps, to do fly-throughs. So that, yes, you had to do your reading before you came in, but then you had a much richer experience, right? And perhaps you were watching earlier discussions before you came in, so that you could see where the discussion could go, so that your current discussion was more refined, right? So it's very interesting that over time, in fact, over the last 6 months, we've gotten a resurgence of interest from our humanities. We don't have law, but we have management school, from our colleagues there who are taking advantage of this. Now, another example I'll give you is Esther Duflo. Esther Duflo is a professor at MIT. She teaches poverty economics. So she uses in a different way. She flipped the classroom and they do discussions in the class, but she simultaneously taught the class to students at MIT and to 35,000 students around the world. But they shared a blog. So it turns out that the discussion in the classroom, a lot of it would occur on the blog. And the discussion in the classroom was actually one level meta to what was happening on the blog, right? So those are just two examples. We're in early days. We learn a lot more. It may be that for classes where you have case studies, the value add isn't that great. My suspicion is we will find other ways to fundamentally change the value add. But that's a great question. Okay. So now I'll just show you some videos. Unfortunately, let's see if the videos play. Yeah, unfortunately the videos won't play because we're not playing it on my computer. But if we were playing it on my computer, you would see that, that you can actually enter equations, and those equations get automatically graded. You can write 1 over R1 plus 1 over R2 plus 1 over R3. If you change the order, it figures it all out and tells you the equation is correct. You can go to this one, again, won't play, but let's see. It won't play. But if you go here, you will see that you can design circuits. You can quite literally drag and drop. These are circuit elements. You can drag a resistor, you can drag a capacitor, you can drag a power source, you can build your own circuit. Then you can see that if you create a certain impulse, you can see how the voltage drains. So it's like a little oscilloscope that pops up, and you can see how the voltage drains. And then you can have that graded to see if you got the performance. Let's say you're designing a filter, as in if you know electrical engineering, you can see if the filter behaved as you liked it, as you wanted it to behave. Coming back to your question, there is absolutely no doubt that we started from engineering. We have a strong engineering bias here, right? And that created two issues for us. One, we had to learn what the other schools would need, but two, they had to learn what this was capable of. And I would say we're in the early stages of that, right? So the next video that, again, won't play, this is actually a full graphic equalizer. You remember graphical equalizers in music systems? So the student can actually go in and input different input forms, but also enter different songs, and then change the the different filters, the different bands of filtering, and see how the song changes. You can take the tabla out, you can take the different musical instruments out, and actually it turns out to be a great way to teach signal processing. So much so that Anand discovered this is actually a better way to teach signal processing than the way he was doing it. So one of the interesting things we discovered was, even up to 3 months ago, I thought that the online method is going to be a compromise, okay? Not as good as the way we teach it in person. But we've discovered that actually the online method in some ways is better. In some ways it's not as good, but in some ways it's better. One of my colleagues, Eric Lander, he's the man who sequenced the human genome, he's a very famous guy. He said to me, Sanjay, when I teach in a regular classroom and I give exams, I'm limited to a sheet of paper. So when I give a DNA string, it has to fit, and it's got to be 2D. But when I do it online, I can give a full 3D molecule, have students rotate it, and look for certain features. So if you think of playing offense in that way, then you can do things that you couldn't do on paper. Clearly, there are things we can do in a real in-person classroom that you can't do here as well. Like this discussion you can't have. You'll have to do it through a blog. But they're not the same thing. They're not, one is a subset of the other. They're two different sets with an intersection.
Just a perspective. Interesting you said that the prior was that it's going to be a compromise.
Yes.
Do you have a view, there are these commercial organizations that are into online in the management space as well, like Apollo Global, yeah, or the University of Phoenix. Their model is compromised, but their model is more mass dissemination of diluted concepts, better than no concepts. Now, I presume in management, the experiments have been of a nature where many of us have not been able to kind of tide over the compromise issue. but we trade off compromise with mass dissemination, which is also important in the Indian context.
Right.
Do you have a view on these organizations? And they are for-profit organizations.
Yeah. So the Phoenix University, Kaplan, Capella, these for-profit organizations, they're actually very threatened by this. In fact, I've spoken to the presidents of 2 of the 3.
And some of them are in India.
Yeah, we've spoken to many of them. I want to clarify, those are distance education programs using online. This is massive online. The difference is we have automatic graders, right? What they do, in some ways it's better actually than what we do. But I'm telling you this is better, right? You have to take my word for it. They have, it's just the person is taking a class remotely, but they're individuals grading them. The problem is to get that sort of scale, they need lots of adjunct faculty of very questionable skill levels, and that's how they teach, right? What we're talking about here is using a computer to automate, frankly, it's a robot, to automate the grading, so it's very high tech. So they're in touch with us. They want to license this stuff because it affects their business model and also potentially affects their quality, right? I want to come back to your question, not really your question, but anyway, by the way, this simulation can show you, electrostatic fields. You can move the charges. You can see how things change. You can grade on that. So it's a very wide range of simulation and grading choices that we've been able to automate. And then combine that with the blog, with the forum, and you create a fairly rich teaching environment. In fact, this is the thing I wanted to show you. Another breakthrough that occurred earlier this year was the automatic grading of essays. That's pretty scary actually, right? We can't do poems yet, right? Because that's too artistic. But if you're talking about short essays, what edX did was they ran a test where they actually train a system with 100 essays that have been graded by a human being. And the system learns how to grade essays. And this is a very sophisticated system. We have 25 years of history of developing natural language processing, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a system that builds on, as I said, 25 years of experience. It takes the text that the student submits. It does natural language processing, pulls out the content to one more level. Then it does semantic processing, pulls it out one more level, and then does cognitive processing. And so by building the system, they don't use the same words, but by building the system, you can train it. And what they find is that the system is surprisingly good, right? And this is its first prototype. And it's surprisingly effective in terms of grading essays relative to human graders. Now, if we all know how fast technology goes, that means next year, it's going to be really good, right? So this got published, and it became a big controversy in the New York Times. And a lot of professors were up in arms, saying, you are doing my job. The sort of arguments, they were twofold. One was, it can't possibly work. Well, that's something anyone can judge, right? I mean, that's not an argument. That's a hope, right? Then the next argument was one of emotion. It was, you're trying to get rid of me and get rid of my job, right? And my counter-argument to that is, the tsunami is coming. If we don't do it, someone else will, right? Number one. Number two, have a little more faith in yourself, Mr. Professor or Mrs. Professor, right? Have a little more faith in yourself. In fact, you can do a lot more with your students. Use this as a tool. Don't see this as a threat to your job, because if that's all your job is, maybe you will lose your job, right? But if you think that's a tool and you want to improve your job and do something different with students, then you actually can enrich the learning environment, right? So that's our response. Anyway, this turned into a big controversy. And then there are a lot of articles about it, with massive open online courses, articles about how it was unbundling the university. Now is a university because I can take one class from Yale, one from IIM Ahmedabad, one from IIT Kanpur, one from MIT, one from Stanford. Who gives me the degree? It's just like your music. You're not listening to a record that the record label designed. You're designing your own playlist, right? So it's a very, very scary concept to everyone. And the reason MIT is taking the charge here is because we think it's the right thing to do, and we'd rather be in front of the wave than behind it, right? And then some people think it's, I think, and actually I agree with this. This is from EdSearch, which is a blog, right? Which is a MOOC can be a faculty member's best friend should professors worry or embrace MOOCs. It's a kind of a, and then meanwhile, some professors see this as the worst enemy, right? So this is all good. It means that it's an interesting technology, right? But the problem is this is going to happen regardless of whether we do it or someone else does it. Now I want to show you this to you. This is from one of our classes. This is the distribution of students worldwide. How many of you have taken an edX class or a Coursera class? Can I get a show of hands? So I'd say